Hey there, it's Pastor Rick once again with another installment of In the Car with PR, video devotional by the Ark Church in Pickerington, Ohio. And by the way, on that note, just a reminder, if you are not attending church anywhere, if you're looking for some place to plug in, we invite you to come out and join us some Sunday morning. Maybe this Sunday would be a good idea. We meet in Pickerington at 10 a.m. at the Passe Dance Studio at 701 Hill Road North. You can get more information about that by logging on our website, www.theark4u.org. That's www.theark4u.org. And we hope to see you this Sunday. But anyway, back to the video devotional. As I'm driving downtown here today, I started thinking about what I'm doing. I work, as most of you know, as a therapist working with young children with autism spectrum disorder, and I drive a lot. I drive actually too much right now. My current schedule has me driving about 3 hours and 15 minutes a day, which is quite a bit of driving, I suppose. And today I had an opportunity for ministry. Someone in our church needed some help downtown Columbus, and I had an opportunity, because of a little break in my schedule, to go give him a hand. And I'll be honest, in the flesh, I wasn't really all that excited about it. Driving 3 hours and 15 minutes a day, to add another hour to my drive is just not something I was all that excited about. It's probably about 30 minutes out of the way and then 30 minutes back to get to my next appointment. And I realized I would only have about a half hour, 45 minutes to get done what needed to be done. And I was, trying to talk myself out of it. And then I realized, well, actually I didn't realize, the Bible verses from Romans kind of jumped out at me. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And in those two verses, we are encouraged not to conform to the way the world lives, not to conform by the customs and the traditions of the world, but instead, we're actually encouraged in those two verses to lay down our lives as living sacrifices for the Lord, as an act of worship. And I started thinking about those verses, and I started thinking about the Christian walk. And you know what? I realized that sacrifice is one of the primary characteristics of a Christian. A person who has truly walked over the line of salvation, they are going to become sacrificial people. Why? Because God calls us to be living sacrifices. He calls us in so many different ways. For the Christian, we are to change the way we think. The world, the most important thing is their own welfare, pleasures, their own desires, having their own needs met. For the Christian, we're supposed to look for ways to meet the needs of others. We're supposed to be others-driven, not self-driven. It's not supposed to be about us, but about other people. It's a sacrificial relationship. And we're supposed to give up our time, loving on other people, ministering to other people. We're called to give up our time to go make disciples. And, if you're taking your disciple-making job seriously, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time because you have to cultivate relationships with people, and then you have to have spiritual discussions and plant spiritual seeds with people. Then you've got to water those seeds with more spiritual discussions, acts of sacrifice, showing love for them, earning the right to be heard. And then, of course, walking them across the line of salvation. And then we're not called to make converts. We're called to make disciples. Therefore, it's a long haul with them, because we've got to not only walk them across the line of salvation, but we've got to teach them what to do. We've got to teach them what Christ taught Christians to do. And we've got to teach them the Word. And we've got to help them to grow and mature as Christians. We're all called to do that. We're called to be sacrificial financially. as Christians. We're told, first of all, that the first 10% of our income goes to God. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but, you know, first of all, the first 20-some% goes to the government. And then on top of that, I've got to give another 10% to God. And it's not just that. God calls us to be sacrificial givers and to help those that are poor, those that are in need. In fact, if we look at the book of Acts and we read about the early church, we realize that they were selling farms, they were selling belongings, they were sharing their wealth with each other. I mean, sacrificing. Rather than them benefiting, they were sharing what they had with everybody else. And it makes sense that God would call Christians to be highly sacrificial because He Himself is very sacrificial. He said that He loved the world so much that He gave His only Son. Can you imagine giving up your child? Can you imagine giving up your child for the sake of people who aren't even asking to be saved, who act like they don't need you, who pretend that you don't exist? That's real sacrifice. It would make sense. It makes sense to me that God would call us to be sacrificial because Christ Himself, our number one example, was sacrificial. He left a place of perfection, heaven, and came and lived a typical life as a human being, flesh and blood, going through the same problems, having the same issues, dealing with the same things. And then He gave His time and energy, and He poured Himself into people for 3 years of ministry, and then gave His life on the cross so that we might have eternal life. It makes sense that following that example, we would be called to be sacrificial people. Today, as you ponder this, as you have your quiet time before the Lord, think about your time and energy. How protective are you of that time and energy? Sometimes we, as Americans, we get very stingy with our time and with our energy, and we tend to do things that we want to do for us, but when it comes to sacrifice, we're not really willing to do that. And even in the church, we become very selfish, basically. And so consider, you know, are you a sacrificial person? Do you regularly sacrifice your time and energy for the sake of other people? If you don't, then now's the time to start. Now's the time to make a change in your way of thinking, in your way of doing things. Jesus said, if you want to save your life, you've got to lay it down. You know, you try to keep your life, you try to hang on to it, you're going to lose it. But if you give it away, if you give your life away, you will receive true life and eternal life. You will receive eternal life. And so it kind of reminds me of that old parable, he is no fool who gives up that which he cannot keep for that which you cannot lose. Today, consider maybe changing the way you think in this area, becoming more sacrificial. Yeah, sacrifice hurts. That's why they call it sacrifice. But remember the words of Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2, that reminds us that when we consider what Christ has done for us, is it too much to ask for us to lay down our lives as living sacrifices for God to use as He sees fit? When you think about it that way, we owe everything to God. And maybe it's time for us to start becoming the sacrificial church that we need to be, the kind that we see in Acts, in the book of Acts, throughout the book of Acts. The church was a very sacrificial church. If we're going to be the real deal in 2019, if we're going to be a church that's the genuine article, we're going to have to learn to be sacrificial today. Make it practical, make it real. What can you do? What sacrifice can you make so that you can more closely follow Jesus' example and be Jesus' hands and feet to somebody in this world? This is Pastor Rick signing off for now. Have a wonderful rest of your day. God bless you.